Well, hello again, everybody. I've never quite understood the reason why companies made a number of VHF-only radios in the early 1970s in Britain when there were still quite a lot of AM stations around at the time. But I'm very glad they did, because I quite like them. And we've got a couple of them to look at today. We already looked quite some time ago at the Harrier RP37A VHF Herald. And today, one of the ones we're looking at is the Harrier RP71 Harrier, which is of about the same vintage. As you can see, FM only, goes up to only 100 megahertz, which is very common for hackers. It's got this interesting tuning scale markings where they've got radios 2, 3 and 4 here marked. So there's a BBC here and then 2, 3 and 4. It doesn't denote any other stations, and there wouldn't really have been many other stations at that time. There would have been local radio, I think, by then. This is, I think, comes from 1971, which is, or maybe probably not connected to the fact that it's called an RP71. I don't think it is. But what they've done is put some red paint behind here, and it's supposed to shine through these gaps and show you where the ranges are. So radio 2 should be 88 to 91, and I'm going in today's ranges because radio 2 is currently 88 to 91, radio 3 is 90 to 93, and radio 4 is 92 to 95. Now it doesn't quite match those. There's also a little radio 4 offshoot up here and a radio 3 offshoot up here, and that may well have been the case that there was some radio 3 fill-in relays or something around that thing. I don't remember them being there, but they must have had them. Commercial radio hadn't started at this time. It generally looks quite nice, and this set mechanically looks in very good condition. The wood is nicely preserved. It's not been faded or anything or scratched very badly. There's a couple of little dents and things. The grill, although these things tend to go very badly and Harrier later replaced them with more robust aluminium extrusion, at least on the Hunter, this hasn't come out too badly. The logo and everything is nicely in place. The handle is there. I'm not sure the telescopic antenna is the original. It doesn't, if I pull it up, I'm not going to easily be able to demonstrate that, but I can't pull it up all the way and pivot it, so I wonder if it's been replaced. The other thing that makes me think it's been replaced is this grommet here, which I suspect is not original. On one side there's a couple of sockets. There's one for an external aerial and one for a 9 volt DC input, and in the usual Harrier / Roberts way, it's got the centre pin negative instead of positive, just to punish you if you get a non-standard power supply by blowing up your radio. Other than that, there's very little to it. Oh, there's a socket on the back with a DIN here, and that is an output only. You can't feed anything in through the speaker to it like you could on Grundig's, which I think is a bit of an omission. They could easily have done that, but they didn't. And usual Harrier grill on the back, and you can get at the other side of it by just opening this up by pulling the... It's got a couple of spring clips which I will attempt to pull off. And we can see inside it, and there's some traditional Harrier stuff. That tuner looks like it comes from an earlier model. It's got the usual Harrier thing with 2 PP9 batteries required, but the interesting thing about this is normally on the older Harriers the PP9s were connected in series and you had an 18 volt supply. The 18 volt supply was used for the audio output stage, but not for the RF stage. It's usually ran off 9 volts. Now what they've done here is the whole thing runs off 9 volts, which you can sort of tell by looking at that external supply is only requiring 9 volts, and what they've done is connected the 2 PP9s in parallel. Now that to me seems a bit of a bad idea really, because I don't really approve connecting batteries in parallel without any protection, because one of them goes a bit weird, it'll just take the other battery down. So I generally thought that's a bad idea, and I was told that, you know, if you can only connect batteries in parallel to get extra current, then what you should do is put a diode in. But obviously if you put a diode in, you're going to get a 0.6 volt voltage drop, so you're only going to get 8.4 volts out of it, but the thing should operate down there. Also, there's no diode as far as I can see in the power supply, which again doesn't protect you if you use a positive pin negative sleeve, which most power supplies would be. In the manual, we can see that they make a lot of noise about the integrated circuit in it being the latest and greatest technology. Now this is a TAD 100. It's actually just a transistor array, really, a couple of long-tailed pairs and a couple of Darlington pairs, used to eliminate a lot of the IF transistors. They haven't done that with the audio side. They've still used discrete transistors on the audio side, and mostly germanium ones as well. And they've used silicon transistors, looks like lock-fit ones, which can occasionally have problems in the FM tuner here. As usual with Hacker, we've got a nice big speaker here, so we can expect some decent audio quality out of it. So let's put that to one side at the moment and look at another FM radio from about the same time, maybe a little bit newer. This one, let me just move that back panel over there so I don't lose it. This one is a Ferguson. It's a Ferguson 3174, and it was also, as I think we covered before in videos here, that Ferguson's part of the British Radio Corporation, and a lot of things were multiply labelled, badge engineered as you might call it. So this Ferguson was also, in addition to being a Ferguson 3174, was also badged as an HMV 2176. Now, they were almost identical. The HMV, if you look at pictures of it, looked a lot better, I think, with its black and silver finish, and looked more impressive than the what I think would have been originally a bit whiter plastic with the wood grain effect here on the Ferguson. But there's no difference internally. They're exactly the same circuitry. So this one again is FM only. Similar to later Roberts radios, it's sort of all preset arrangement, except that the last one isn't a preset. I'll sort of show you that. So 1, 2 and 3 here are your preset channels, and then when you switch it to 4, these are pushing out a bit, don't really line up, unfortunately. When you switch it to 4, if you look at the top here, you can see that 4, you can't quite see that because the way I've angled it and the light, but you can see that 4 is a tuning control. So you have a manual tuning control here, which goes from 88 to 104, so a bit more range than the Hacker. And that's what you tune in when you press it to position 4. For all the others, if we go around the back of it, you can see that we have 3 presets here. Actually, they're the other way around because they line up looking from the front. So this is 1, 2 and 3, and these tweak what your 1, 2 and 3 are tuned to. Just like the Hacker, you've got an external aerial socket, although it's a 300 ohm here rather than a car aerial type thing. You have a external speaker rather than a headphone socket. I don't think the Hacker had a headphone socket actually. And you've got this tape recorder one, but this one, unlike the Hacker, does actually have the facility to put signal into it and have it come back through the speakers. And again, if you look at the top here, you can see it's got a rather Grundig-like thing where if you press 2 and 3 together, assuming they'll stay in, which doesn't seem to be a given, that will give you the feed from the DIN socket back to your speaker. Battery wise, and it seems to be quite a bit of a struggle here to get it out, but this packs in 6 D cells, which makes it quite heavy. Also, it's quite difficult to keep them in, and I sort of wish I hadn't taken this out now, but then that little thing locks it in. But it also has, and this is something that the Hacker doesn't have, it has a figure of 8 mains input, so you can run it off the mains. You don't see many of these about. You see more of the Hackers about, I think. These are quite rare. I'd love to have an HMV one, which I think looks better, but the only HMV one I saw ever was stupidly priced, really, given that this Ferguson has got exactly the same functionality. I'm not too bothered about that. Clearly, as I said, I think this was not originally supposed to be as yellowed as this is now. I think it was possibly supposed to be more white. But it looks okay, and it's in reasonable condition. Although I don't know exactly what that state the Hacker's in. I've only just got it, really. So this one I've had for quite a while. I know there's a couple of little irritating things, like the presets sometimes need an extra push when you power it on, which might be a capacitor that's gone a bit funny. But it's nothing I can't cope with, and it's nothing I've felt obliged to take it apart for. And I quite like this one. So we'll have a quick listen to this one first, because this one I think is probably in more usable condition.
Across Cambridgeshire,
this is Greatest Hits Radio. Sound
It actually sounds pretty good, I think. I will show you, though, what tends to happen. It probably won't happen now that I try and show you it, but if I turn it back on... You see, that was tuned to Radio 3. And if I give that another push, it works. So whether it's a dirty contact on there, or maybe a capacitor that's not quite coming up properly or not charging properly, maybe it's that, but it doesn't really bother me very much, and I find it very usable. I think you can agree that's pretty decent sound, really, for a radio of that age. Let's take a quick look inside it anyway and see what's there. Right, taking the battery cover off, I think you can definitely see the different colour here of the plastic on that side and that side to see how much it's tarnished over the years. So I think these two screws here and possibly those two screws in the bottom should allow us to dismantle it. I ought to look at the manual, really, didn't I, before I do this? Yeah, the manual confirms my initial diagnosis, so we'll take these out. As I said, I've never had this apart before because it didn't really need any work on it, so I didn't see the need to dismantle it or anything, despite it having a couple of irritating features. Obviously, I'm going to attempt not to do my usual thing and take a perfectly well working radio and destroy it by dismantling it. We try not to do that on this channel, but as we know, it doesn't always happen, so I may be taking a bit of a risk here, but you can all have a good laugh at me later if that's the case, can't you? Alright, here we go. So, yeah, interesting layout. We can see here the mains supply. So we've got a mains input here, and obviously a cut off for the connection to the battery compartment when you've got the mains plugged in. You've also got quite an extensive power supply circuit on here. Now the reason for that is, as you may have guessed, given the separate tuning controls, this is using varicap tuning. Now, if you're not aware of what that is, and so instead of using the normal variable capacitor, we use a reverse bias diode, which has a capacitance that can be varied by varying the voltage on it, which is useful for doing preset tuning like this and on these things, but of course it needs a stable power supply, so we don't want it to drift off when your battery goes down or whatever, or if the main's at a slightly different voltage. So there's quite a bit of voltage stabilization on this board to get a stable supply for these variable resistors, effectively, which set the voltage on the varicap diodes. And the rest of the electronics is on one relatively easily accessible board. You'd have to take the control knobs and things off the front to withdraw it, and also the aerial, I believe, and then you'd be able to get at those things. I'm just looking to see if I can see any evidence of dodgy capacitors on it. It's rather difficult to see from this angle. As I said, most of the voltage stabilization is on here. That capacitor there looks pretty solid and as new, so I'm not inclined really to do anything with it. As I said, it's broadly working. I'm just going to put it back together, but I thought it'd be interesting to have a look inside it. There's quite a lot of empty space. Maybe that contributes to the decent sound quality that we're getting from the speaker. There's a bit of resonance here, which helps out a bit, perhaps.
The ideal curated music mix for your morning.
Whether you want to relax or revitalise.
Plus, something to get your grey matter moving in our Playlister challenge. John emails, how about something 800 years old? Merry it is while summer elast, by that most prolific of composers, Anon.
Essential Classics, weekday mornings from 9:30.
Just ask your smart speaker to play Radio 3.
If you have enjoyed the live music from the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra this afternoon, can I point you in the direction of In Tune in a little over an hour at 5 o'clock, Petrol on Friday. Now something truly... Oh yeah, Naughty by Nature OPP. I've just turned this right up. Rob the coach driver in Windsor. Have you got a coach full of people? Do they mind? I'm just saying. Nice one, OPP. Banging tune, says Gavin in Belfast. And also to Sally in Cheshire, who love nights like this. There's a lot of fans for Danel's nights like this. He's got to get that together and really push that tune. Hells loves it as well. And Justin. So yeah, we're good. We're good. I better load up your travel bed, Bobby.
Yeah, if you could. I could do it acoustically if you like.
Do you know what? If only we could record our conversations in between songs.
back trolley by your side with more bird food, bread, and a dustpan and brush placed on top. And the hand of the brush and gold. Doing what you do.
You here with me since I had to learn to be someone you don't.
So I don't think this one sounds anywhere near as good at the moment as the Ferguson. I don't know if you could really hear it, but I felt there was quite a bit of hiss in the background on a few of those stations. Also, in terms of the audio, I had to have that tone control, and the tone control is all the way up, and it still didn't sound particularly toppy as it should be, I think. So I don't know whether, again, some capacitor has gone funny or that tone control needs a bit of a clean or something like that. It's also very dependent on signal strength. I don't know if you noticed when I got to 96, which was the Radio Cambridge, so it suddenly jumped up in volume, which you shouldn't really do on FM. Also, I found it quite difficult to tune and not get distortion, so it's quite difficult to position, so maybe the AFC isn't working properly either. There isn't an AFC button on this. This is automatic AFC. Actually, what I didn't point out on the Ferguson was that the AFC on the Ferguson is released by holding the button in, which may be something to do with why when you switch it on, it doesn't quite stabilise properly. But again, as I said, I'm not particularly bothered about that. Getting back to this one, I think it's not quite right. In terms of the antenna, I've fed both of these off a ribbon aerial, which is just clipped onto this because the antennas themselves are difficult to extend in this environment. Whereas if I just clip the ribbon aerial to the end of it, at least they're both getting a fair crack of the whip, so to speak. You see what I did there. Let's have a look in the back of this again, because I have some suspicion about this antenna in that it doesn't pull all the way out, and I can't see a hinge anywhere in it. I've probably got to take this whole thing out. The other thing I've noticed is that if I move this, you can see that, possibly see that the whole thing there isn't particularly secure. So somebody has had this out before, I think. The other thing that leads me to believe that somebody has tinkered with it before, well, I don't know if you can see this. I might have to zoom in a bit for you to see this properly. Let me just do that for a moment. You see here, somebody has scribbled the transistor pinouts with the base collector emitter and the colours, which look like being the ones for the audio output transistors here, which suggests that at least one of those has been replaced in the past. The capacitors all look pretty solid. I can't see anything leaking in any of them. The antenna connection, that external antenna socket here, isn't connected anymore. So that again suggests that this antenna has been rewired and they decided just to miss that out. But also on there's a black wire coming off it. Oh no, there's a black wire coming off so that yellow one goes onto the FM tuner, and the ground for the FM tuner, well, that goes nowhere. Now to me that should go, it looks to me like that ought to go here, because there's a wire missing from that bit. And I think that's a connection to a sort of ground plane to give it better reception, so that probably doesn't help. Also, here's something I found after stopping recording, but I'm just going to go right to the end here. You can hear static there on the radio. And when I get to the bottom end, or the low frequency end of the scale, there's a bit of crackling, which I think means that there's probably a short at one end of the tuning capacitor. So a few things to look at, I think. So I think I'm going to start by just pulling the thing apart a bit more and getting the main chassis out of the case. Alright, let's have a look at this tuning capacitor first, because as I said, I think there was a bit of a short circuit on that at this end. Yeah, I can see that almost immediately. Let's get you in here. That vein of the tuning capacitor definitely looks bent, so I'm going to have to try and correct that. That's probably why it's making that horrible noise at the bottom end of the scale. as it comes round here. Hopefully should be straightforward to fix. There is definitely evidence of replacement of transistors here. Yes, it wasn't the output transistor that they replaced by the looks of things. No, I think they may have replaced the output transistor looking at soldering. But they also, having done that and it didn't fix it, realised that it would probably have to replace the driver transistor here. And they haven't actually cut the, if you can see here, they haven't actually cut the leads off the end. They just soldered it in and didn't bother to trim the leads. So where are we now with this hacker? Right, I looked at the possibility of replacing the antenna and decided against it. This isn't ideal in that it's an antenna with no hinge in it, but I couldn't find anything that would fit easily, so I've left the fix as it was done, because it's not a particularly bad one and it's reasonably stable. What I have done is reintroduce the wiring via the external aerial socket here, so that you can use the external aerial socket, which you couldn't before. I've also grounded this black wire, which originally was just floating in mid-air. I've done the usual thing of changing over from PP9 to PP3, because you can't get PP9s anymore. Now, as far as the noise on FM and slight distortion is concerned, I thought I'd replace the capacitor across the ratio detector, which sometimes causes problems with that. And I also changed the first transistor in the FM tuner for a more modern one, which hopefully should give lower noise. I think that has done. There may be a bit of confirmation bias there in that I spent some time getting that transistor in, so I feel it ought to have had an effect. Not sure whether it really had. I feel it sort of has. In terms of the muffled audio sound, so I thought once I started replacing capacitors, I'm not, as you know, one for wholesale replacement of electrolytic capacitors in these sets, particularly when you have the blue ones, which don't seem to be too bad. But I thought as I'd started it, and there weren't that many of them, I did in fact replace them all to see if that improved the performance of the audio. Short answer is it didn't, and having taken these capacitors out, most of them were pretty much within spec. There were a few of them were slightly leaky, as in electrically leaky, not physically leaky. None of them were leaking electrolyte all over the place or anything like that. I also changed the capacitor in the tone control circuit. That's that little yellow one up there. Didn't make much difference either. I then thought I'll have a look on the internet, and particularly on the Vintage Radio Forum, see if anybody else had this problem with RP71s. And there's a chap called Mark Hennessy who does a lot of work with hackers and has an excellent website, which I'll link in the comments. And he'd made a comment on the Vintage Radio Forum about the fact that these sets lack any treble response. And he'd said, well, really, it's a speaker. And you may, while I've been talking, have noticed the big elephant in the room, or rather the large magnet in the middle here, which is different from the one we had before. So this is the original speaker that came with it, and it does appear that it really does lack any treble response. And Hacker presumably had used this speaker, it's a Goodman's apparently, had used this speaker in AM radios, which of course it doesn't matter when you're going up to 4.5 kilohertz, but not good enough for an FM radio. So Mr. Hennessy is absolutely right. I thought I'll try changing the speaker. I got a speaker from a Grundig, one of the good old boys we feature very often on this channel, and that has improved things, certainly. So yeah, they just put a speaker in it that wasn't very good. I don't think it's the actual fault of the speaker in terms, the speaker itself looks fine, it's in good condition. It's just not the right speaker for this set. It's strange that. I have this theory, which I think I may have raised on this channel before. I often come up with the same hobby horse on a regular basis. In the early days of FM radio, although we're not talking about particularly early days, are we, here in 1970, 71, elderly relatives back in the 70s that would listen to radio on medium wave or long wave, and they had VHF on their sets, and I'd change it over to VHF as a much clearer signal, and thought I'd get some gratitude for that. And they said, oh, no, that's too tinny, that's too tinny. And the strange thing is, of course, they're not people who'd ever been to many concerts or anything like that. Their experience of music was mostly through AM radio, and they thought really, that music was supposed to sound cut off at 4.5 kilohertz. And if you were hearing a lot of hi-hat and things like that, it's too tinny. So I wonder if, in fact, there are a lot of, because I've seen this before in British radio sets, that they sort of thought, well, we'll tone down the top-end response so we can sell FM to people who think that everything should sound really muffled. A bit like when the royal family apparently think that the whole world smells of paint because everywhere they go has been painted a few hours in advance. Anyway, into this Great British Radio we have now introduced the Germans in the shape of this speaker, and yeah, it's improved things.
Chris, it's been an absolute treat to chat to you. Looking forward to seeing you on Friday the 16th of Jan for I can't believe it's 50 years, but the 50th anniversary tour of You To Me Are Everything. Thank you for being our guest, Chris.
That's no problem, man. It's been a pleasure.
Dottie McLeod at breakfast on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
You know who that is, right?
I don't know that name. Good morning.
Joshy.
Try it. You might like it.
Dottie McLeod at breakfast. Weekdays from 6. Just ask your smart speaker to play BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
Introducing Track of the Week.
So comparing these two sets finally, which one should we choose then? Well, I think if we'd taken it as it came from the factory and without the speaker modification, we'd have had to say the Ferguson sounds a lot better, is a lot more sensitive. The Hacker, having made some modifications, is acceptable now, but it's a pity they couldn't have made those modifications at the factory, really, and putting a decent speaker into it, and perhaps paying a bit more attention to the sensitivity, the FM stage. And that's not impossible for Hacker, because the RP37A is a much better set, and also an FM-only set, so they knew how to do that, but for some reason, in this case, they just neglected it. If you're looking at them from an aesthetic point of view, I would certainly say the Hacker is something you'd much rather have sitting in your living room or your kitchen or anywhere, really, because it looks really nice. Whereas this does look a bit utilitarian. It looked a bit better in the HMV model version, but certainly the white plastic hasn't aged very well, and it is more of a kitchen thing, isn't it? It looks a bit like a kitchen appliance anyway. But I'd still go back to which one performs better. And it's this one. I think, to sum it up really, this one is John Thaw in Inspector Morse with his Jag, and this one is John Thaw playing Jack Regan in the Sweeney in his Ford Consul GT, and I've always been a bit more of a Ford man really. Anyway, hope you found this interesting. I'll see you on the next one.